What was the situation leading up to the German commencement of Fall Gelb? What were the forces that took place? And how was the campaign conducted? We look at the campaign overview for the Battle of France 1940. Ladies and gentlemen, the Battle of France 1940 campaign overview, part 1. Once again, a really big thank you to Major Paul Knight and the team at the British Army's Land Warfare Centre Lessons Exploitation Centre for providing this very comprehensive campaign overview. In John Mill's 1958 film Dunkirk, the journalist Charles Foreman surveys the chaos on the beaches with the lines, "No, you can't blame the army. They had what we gave them, last war's weapons, last war's methods. This is the result." The events of May and June 1940 produce a dichotomy. On one hand, there is the Dunkirk spirit, shown by the small ships, but also applied by the ordinary soldier on the beaches, waiting stoically to be rescued by the Royal Navy and the pleasure sailors. The other, as summarised by Charles Foreman, was of a British Army woefully inadequately trained and equipped for modern warfare, of which Germans were clearly the masters. Notwithstanding the undoubted heroism and discipline behind the majority of the evacuation, the story behind the British Expeditionary Force is far more complex. The Anglo-centric concentration on the British Army, and especially the evacuations, masks the simple fact that the British Army was, by far, the junior partner. In terms of divisions, even Belgium fielded more than Britain. On the 10th of May 1940, when Germany commenced their invasion of the Low Countries and France, there were 104 French divisions, 22 Belgium, Great Britain had 13 divisions, and the Netherlands had 10. That gives a total of 149 divisions on the defence. Germany was attacking with just 93. When we drill into the details of the 13 British divisions, we see a mixture of capabilities. There are 5 first-line territorial divisions, 42nd, 44th, 48th, 50th and 51st, and there are 3 second-line territorial divisions, the 12th, 23rd and 46th. So these last 3 were raised in 1939 as part of the doubling of the TA. And on the 10th of May 1940, they were still only partially trained and lacking their full complement of equipment. They were mostly employed on line of communications and infrastructure construction tasks. Despite this, Britain deployed some 440,000 personnel to the northeast France between September 1939 and May 1940. This was in addition to home defence, imperial defence, especially due to the uncertainty of the Italian position and their colonies of Libya and Abyssinia, and the Norwegian campaign. The deployment of the 42nd East Lancashire Division Territorial Army was delayed due to uncertainty over whether it would be deployed to France or to Norway. In the end, it went to France, but without one of its 3 field artillery regiments, which was sent to Norway. In looking at how those British divisions were armed, we can compare and contrast that with the British Expeditionary Force of the First World War. In the aftermath of the British Army's underwhelming performance during the Boer War, there were wholesale reforms on just about every aspect of the army. The British Expeditionary Force, which deployed to France in 1914, was arguably the best equipped Britain had ever sent abroad. Unfortunately, the army was orientated towards light, mobile colonial policing, not the siege warfare that it would see against a peer enemy. With peace in 1918, the British government adopted financial retrenchment and the 10-year rule. The 10-year rule policy asserted that Britain would not be required to fight a peer enemy in Europe within the next 10 years. And in the world of 1919, this made perfect sense. None of the European powers were in any position to threaten Britain, and most were preoccupied with the revolutionary impacts of the war. Various local conflicts resulting from the First World War resolved themselves during the early 1920s. The civil wars in Russia and Ireland, rebellions in Iraq, Kurdistan and Egypt, civil unrest in India, which culminated in the Amritsar massacre. As the strategic situation became increasingly benign, there was a further reduction in the army's commitments. The ending of the first 10-year plan coincided with the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression, and so the extension of the 10-year plan was both politically and financially expedient. In the mid-1930s, the resurgence of German ambition and confidence meant that the rearmament of all three armed forces was necessary. The British Treasury and the economy of the 1930s were not as strong as they had been in the 1910s, and the army now had to compete not just with the Royal Navy, but also with the Royal Air Force for its share of the limited budget. But with an increasing threat from Germany, the question asked was how quickly the TA could mobilise and how much could it contribute. The initial answer was not a lot. As late as September 1937, the Secretary of State for War, Leslie Hore-Belisha, visited the Maginot Line and the French Army manoeuvres and wondered whether France needed any help from the British Army. Defence planners recognised that any sizable deployment onto the continent would require the mobilisation and deployment of the Territorial Army. In 1940, the TA provided half of the 10 frontline divisions. For political, financial and industrial reasons, this reality was not adopted in the mid-1930s. A policy of no liability or limited liability dominated. The Army's limited ability to deploy to the continent, coupled with a political unwillingness to repeat the experiences of 1914-1918 and the cost of reinvigorating the Army, regular and territorial, to the standard required for a major liability, were considered unaffordable in the economically difficult times of the late 1930s. Rearmament expenditure was prioritised for the RAF, and the TA received an increase to its annual budget of just £50,000. This was less of a problem than might initially be considered, as the rearmament of the regular army naturally took priority, and there was simply insufficient industrial capacity to provide all of the new weapons to all of the army, regular and reserve, in the UK and overseas at the same time. The TA's 42nd East Lancashire Division would not receive its full complement of anti-tank guns until after the 10th of May 1940. However, the most significant and underrated change occurred in the field of mobility. Each battalion's reconnaissance platoon was equipped with universal carriers, the Bren gun carriers. These tracked vehicles provided the platoon with all-terrain capability, protection against small arms fire, and fire support from a Bren light machine gun. Their actual employment in 1940 was far greater. Examples included local counterattack, rear guard, casualty evacuation, resupply, troop carrying, and even vehicle recovery. In an era where armour was still a novelty, the carrier was apparently routinely reported as a tank by the Germans. The other aspect was the troop carrying companies. The 1940 BEF was entirely motorised, unlike other combatants. There was insufficient organic transport in the British Army unit to lift the infantry, although the carriers could move limited numbers of infantry. There are also examples of using the divisional artillery's empty ammunition wagons to provide lift capability. These two examples alone provide the British infantryman with more motorised lift capacity than his French or German counterpart could expect. They mostly still marched like their fathers. The troop-carrying companies were centralised assets which were allocated to redeploy specific units and formations. They permitted rapid redeployments to plug gaps in the lines, most notably the 50th Division from Arras to Ypres following the surrender of the Belgian army and the resultant gap in the line. This was a move of some 60 miles. Using a 1918 model, this would have been a 3-day march and the division would have arrived too late to be of any use. Another example is the deployment of the 145th Brigade into Cassel. This was aided by Hitler's halt order, otherwise a brigade of lorried infantry troop would have run into a Panzer Division, but without the troop-carrying companies, this move would have been impossible. The other use of the troop-carrying companies was in the withdrawal, especially on the eastern flank. Here, the BEF were mostly facing German infantry divisions, marching on foot and reliant on horse-drawn logistics. The ability to disengage and withdraw at greater speed than the Germans could follow up permitted the BEF to establish new defensive positions and, almost certainly, have a brew before the German advance to contact caught up with them. The most striking example of this capability disparity occurred around what became the Lille pocket. The BEF's First Corps was extracted from Lille and behind the defensive line established on the Ypres-Comines Canal, which was in itself only made possible because of the redeployment of 50th Division from Arras. The French First Army was unable to effect a similar move, and 40,000 troops were captured. This brings us to the Phoney War. The period between September 1939 and May 1940 was termed the Phoney War or the Boer War. That's B-O-R-E War. Now, this was only applicable in France, as fighting had broken out in April 1940 in Norway, and at sea, the German heavy cruiser Admiral Graf Spee was commencing its raids on Allied merchant vessels on the 26th of September 1939. The main task undertaken during the winter of 1939-40 by the BEF was the construction of the Gort Line. This was essentially a continuation of the Maginot Line along the Franco-Belgian border. The Maginot Line was a significant series of fortifications along the Franco-German border, and it is one of the projects which is denigrated as a white elephant. It absorbed a large proportion of the French defence budget, which could have been better employed in developing a more mobile, armoured army appropriate for 1940. It has also been accused of developing a defensive mentality within the French army. Robert Doughty, in The Seeds of Disaster, argues that, in reality, the Maginot Line performed its designated function in 1940, and that the failures of 1940 lay elsewhere. Essentially, it was a manpower-efficient means of defending a large, shared border to protect regions of vital natural resources and industrial capacity, thereby permitting the concentration of divisions for manoeuvre operations in northeast France and Belgium. A manpower shortage relative to Germany following the First World War was a major concern for the French army. The loss of major industrial regions of Alsace-Lorraine in 1870 and the northeastern France area around Luz and Lens in 1914 to Germany had been major detriments to France's ability to wage war after 1914. France's ability to concentrate almost 100 divisions on the Belgian border protected northeast France and meant that the next war would be fought in Belgium, not France, further protecting French industry and agriculture and avoiding the destruction of the First World War. There were two problems with the construction of the Gort Line. Firstly, units and formations were limited in their ability to conduct training exercises for forthcoming operations. Some did, including Major General Bernard Montgomery's 3rd Division, which exercised both advances and retirements. The second problem was that the Allied plan in response to the German invasion of the Low Countries was to leave these prepared positions and to meet the Germans in Belgium and the Low Countries. The plan, which was adopted by General Maurice Gustave Gamelin, the Supreme Commander of the Allied armies, was the Breda variant of the Dyle Plan. This is Plan D. Although officially neutral, secret conversations with the Belgian army revealed their intention to hold a line along the Albert Canal and Maas River. Gamelin knew that this was too far east for his forces to reach before the Germans, so he selected a line along the River Dyle, which it's not really a river, it's much more of a large stream, through central Belgium and covering Brussels. The Belgian army would be then able to fall back and join the Allied armies. From there, Gamelin planned to conduct a methodical battle where the Allies could bring their superiority, especially in artillery, to bear. This was to be conducted by the 1st Army Group, consisting of the BEF and French 1st and 9th Armies. Also in the 1st Army Group, but not involved in the move, was the French 2nd Army, whose left boundary included Sedan. The 7th Army provided the GQG Reserve, or the Grand Quartier General, or General Headquarters. The French 7th Army was based at Reims behind the 9th Army, but also able to support 2nd Army. And as the German plan, Fall Gelb envisioned Army Group A in the region of Sedan and Monterme, precisely on the French 2nd and 9th Army boundary, 7th Army was perfectly placed to counterattack and defeat any attempted German breakout. However, Gamelin was concerned that no attempt was being made to support the Dutch, and on the 20th of March 1940, he issued the Breda variation. 7th Army was transferred from the Strategic Reserve to the extreme left of the Allied line. Their role was to advance through Belgium to join the Dutch at Breda. This one decision left France devoid of any strategic reserve. The fate of the Battle of France was sealed. The evolution of the German plan Fall Gelb, or Case Yellow, is extremely convoluted, and we'll look at it a little bit later. It's expertly covered in chapters 2 and 3 of Friese's The Blitzkrieg Legend, which is a really important book, and I'd highly recommend picking up a copy if you can. The first point of note is that the Blitzkrieg was not a doctrine in the German army. Its existence is summarised by Professor Sir Hugh Strawn. It was victory that gave Blitzkrieg the status of doctrine. The initial version of Fall Gelb involved the German Schwerpunkt, or main effort, conducting a right hook through the Low Countries, which would clash with the Allied Schwerpunkt, resulting in a First World War style clash of arms described as a Sichelschnitt, or cauldron fight, a battle of annihilation of which Verdun during the First World War proved an example. Friese argues that this clash of arms was anticipated by Hitler and the German High Command. In early 1940, doubts about the existing Fall Gelb emerged and a revision was ordered. The revised Fall Gelb, which would be implemented in May, was authorised on the 24th of February 1940. This plan consisted of 4 main thrusts: an airborne invasion of the Netherlands by Luftlandekorps, or Air Landing Corps, with ground support provided by AOK 18. This was part of Heeresgruppe, or Army Group B. Army Group B would advance through central Belgium. Army Group A would advance through the Ardennes, and Army Group C would pin 24 Allied intervention divisions on the Maginot Line, including the 51st Highland Division. It's now worthwhile having a little bit of a look at the Orbats. I'm going to pick out the edited highlights of these, but I will put all of this on the show notes. So have a look at the show notes. It'll include it in a lot more detail. Army Group A is under von Rundstedt. So this is the main effort. It contains Panzergruppe Kleist, which has got the 19th Army Corps under Guderian, the 41st Army Corps under Reinhard, and the 14th Army Corps under Wittersheim. AOK 4 under von Klug. An AOK, that's an Army Oberkommando, which is effectively an Army Higher Command, so it's the equivalent of a full army. AOK 12 under List, and AOK 16 under Busch. Now, important to note, Panzergruppe Kleist, all motorised. AOK 4 under von Klug, that's got the corps under Hoth. Hoth has got the 5th and 7th Panzer Divisions. It's 7th Panzer that's commanded by Rommel. And Rommel will come up at a few interesting points as we dissect this campaign. He's also got 1 infantry division in there that's not motorised. Army Group B under von Bock. This is responsible for the Netherlands and central Belgium, and it's been described as being the Matador's red cloak. They will invade with the intent of drawing the best of the British and French armies into Belgium, allowing Army Group A to do its work with its Sichelschnitt, or sickle cut, to cut them off. Army Group B, it's got the Luftlandekorps under Student, AOK 6 under von Reichenau, and AOK 18 under von Kuchler. With the French army, we've got General of the Army Gamelin. Under him is General Georges with the Northeast Theatre of Operations. He has got Army Group 1 under General Biotta. He has 1st, 2nd, 7th and 9th Army. Of critical note, that's 7th Army, which was the Strategic Reserve. And then we've got the British Expeditionary Force under General Lord Gort. Under him, he has his GHQ forces, which is 5th Division under Franklin, the 51st Highland Division, which has been attached to the French Army, 1st Tank Brigade, 1st Armoured Reconnaissance Brigade, and 2nd Armoured Reconnaissance Brigade. There are 3 corps. So First Corps under Barker has got the 1st and 2nd Divisions under Alexander and Lloyd, and the 48th, so a TA division, South Midland Division under Thorne. 2nd Corps under Brooke has got 3rd and 4th under Montgomery and Johnson, and the 50th Northumbrian Division under Martel. 3rd Corps under Adam has got the 42nd East Lancashire Division under Holmes and the 44th Home Counties Division under Osborne. You've also got line of communication troops, 12th Eastern Division under Petrie, 23rd Northumbrian Division under Herbert, and the 46th North Midland and West Riding Division under Curtis. This brings us to the 10th of May. Gelb commences with air raids on numerous airfields across northern France and the Low Countries. The first raid was successful, but second and third raids later in the day were met with alert and determined air defences, which resulted in significant losses and a reduced tempo of sorties for the next few days. The Luftwaffe also participated in the airborne assault against Fortress Holland by using gliders to deliver assault engineers onto the roof of the Belgian fortress at Eben-Emael, and Operation Niwi. Operation Niwi, which the name of that comes from the twin objectives of the operation, which was Nives and Witry, both in the Ardennes. And this was using Fieseler Storch light reconnaissance aircraft to insert troops and seize crossroads at both Nives and Witry. The main effect of Operation Niwi was to prevent the withdrawal order from reaching the Belgian chasseurs Ardennes. The French Air Force received reports of armoured columns in the Ardennes, but permission to attack them was denied because it was discounted as a feint, and the main Allied air campaign was directed against the columns entering central Belgium. Looking at Fortress Holland, the Dutch defensive plan recognised that its small army could not hold its long common border with Germany, and so it intended to fall back using the extensive network of rivers and canals to defend The Hague, with defensive lines constructed to cover the dry gaps. The main two were the Gelb and the New Water lines, located east of The Hague between the IJsselmeer and River Lek. The former was a 25-mile heavily wooded ridge between an inundated valley reinforced with concrete bunkers and anti-tank ditches. The second defensive position, the Peel Line, was constructed to cover southern Netherlands, and the only mobile formation was echeloned to prevent envelopment from across the Belgian border. The prospect of a German invasion around the Dutch-Belgian border would see the Dutch retiring northwest on The Hague and the Belgians retiring southwest on Brussels. This would expose Breda, into which the French 7th Army was to deploy. The Dutch army also deployed troops at vulnerable points to counter anticipated airborne landings. Half of the Dutch Air Force was destroyed in the first German air raids, although several German aircraft were shot down. German paratroops parachuted around Rotterdam and The Hague to seize 3 airfields, although they were all lost due to Dutch counterattacks. Air landing troops followed in Junkers 52 transport aircraft, and an assault at the incomplete Valkenburg airfield ended in farce, with 57 aircraft becoming bogged down in the soft ground until no more attempts could be made. Subsequently, the airborne assault was a failure, and the airborne troops were ordered to concentrate and dig in until relieved. Further airborne landings around Rotterdam focused on securing bridges, which encountered spirited resistance. Float planes landed in Rotterdam to secure a bridge there. The Dutch Navy deployed to support the bridge defenders. Dutch and British air raids targeted the Dutch airfields to deny their future use. The land invasion was launched concurrently. Arnhem fell on the 10th, but subsequent advances by motorised SS units were delayed by Dutch horse-mounted hussars. The Germans' own 1st Cavalry Division made slow progress penetrating the Dutch frontier defences, but then made rapid progress through the north of the Netherlands. The Gelb line was abandoned on the 12th of May when a withdrawal to the New Water line was ordered. Dutch defenders blew all of the bridges over the River Maas with one exception. At Gennep, German commandos dressed as Dutch military police escorting German PWs surprised and overpowered the defenders to seize the railway bridge intact. This allowed a German armoured train carrying an infantry battalion to cross safely and detrain 2 miles behind the Peel line. With the line broken, the Dutch defenders were forced to withdraw. The breach in the Peel line was exploited by the 9th Panzer Division and SS Verfolgung Division. At the same time, the first units of the French 7th Army were arriving in Breda. On the 13th of May, 9th Panzer Division attempted to relieve the airborne troops with mixed results. Dutch resistance was stubborn and inflicted significant damage on German armoured vehicles, but was generally short-lived. The withdrawal of the Belgians from the Albert Canal threatened the French right flank, and early on the 13th, elements of the 9th Panzer Division defeated a Dutch counterattack on the German airborne forces holding the Moerdijk Bridge, relieving the exhausted airborne troops and opening the way to Rotterdam. On the 14th, Rotterdam was defended by some 10,000 Dutch troops, but all of the anti-aircraft cover had been withdrawn to The Hague and the Dutch Air Force was now negligible. The Dutch defenders were invited to surrender but refused. A second offer was made, but it coincided with a major Luftwaffe air raid which was inbound. Attempts to abort the air raid were only partially successful. The second wave aborted, but the first wave still delivered the attack, resulting in over 800 civilian deaths. The Dutch commander surrendered later that day. The following day, the Dutch requested an armistice, while Queen Wilhelmina established a Dutch government in exile in London. We're about halfway through our overview, so what we'll do is we'll end here and we will come back next week to look at the German assault on the Fort Eben-Emael.
The Principles of War podcast is brought to you by James Ealing. The show notes for the Principles of War podcast are available at www.theprinciplesofwar.com for maps, photos and other information that didn't make it into the podcast. Follow us on Facebook or tweet us at Surprise Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes and tag a mate in on one of our episodes. All opinions expressed by individuals are those of those individuals and not of any organisation.